Everybody, good to be with you, and thanks, Patrice, for having me share today on the history of faith and work. And so today I'm just going to take about 15-20 minutes to share with you the history of faith at work that I've been very strategically involved with over the years, and we call it the modern day faith and work movement. What is workplace ministry? Well, workplace ministry is an intentional focus of equipping men and women in all spheres of work and society to understand and experience their work and life as a holy calling from God. And I hope that each of you is doing that, and I know this program is helping us do it better. Let's take a look at the marketplace as it relates to Christians and faith at work. All right, well, that gives you a little snapshot of the representation of faith and Christianity in the workplace today, especially in America. But today we're going to talk about Faith at Work Awakening that took place between 1995 and 2005. And I was blessed to be a part of the birthing of that, one of many leaders that were fostering and stewarding that. And so I have a perspective that maybe some don't have because I was so strategically involved. Let me give you a snapshot of kind of the history on how we got to where we are today. Well, in 1930, the CBMC, which is Christian Businessmen's Committee, was primarily a white executive ministry focused on evangelism. And this was a time when Billy Graham was having his greatest influence, and I would describe this as the gospel of salvation period of our nation. And so God was moving, and many people were coming to Christ through Billy Graham and his crusades. The only problem was that this was also a time when people would say, "I'll never do business with a Christian." And there was a lot of hypocrisy because men and women were trying to live their faith out, but they weren't applying biblical theology to how they did their work, how they sold cars, how they did lawyering, how they did any kind of business. And so that didn't happen until the following decade, and which in the 1990s and even 1985, we saw the birthing of a new focus, and that was what I would call a theology of work, which is more the gospel of the kingdom. We know that Jesus spoke more about the gospel of the kingdom than anything else. He wanted to bring his presence into whatever area you were. And so we saw groups like the International Christian Chamber of Commerce, birthed in 1985. We saw C12 in 1992, Ministry and Daily Life in 1991. And I'm sure there were many others that I'm not sharing today. But the focus was a theology of work. And then we saw another shift in around 95 and 97, where we began to see more of a social transformation area. And that was when Billy Graham and Ed Silvoso and Henry Blackaby and Peter Wagner began to say that they believed there was a move of God in the workplace taking place right then, and that it was all about transformation of cities and nations. And so we had a lot of conferences around that theme. And we even had a spirituality at work focus, which was New Age. And then in 1998, I birthed the International Christian Workplace Ministry Organization. That was designed to get leaders within the ministry movement to come together. We had conferences and just articulated what we saw God doing in the marketplace. And it never became an association. It was more of a loose-knit fellowship. And then we saw a focus on the local church. His Church at Work through Doug Spada was birthed in 2001. We also began to see for the first time a focus on the 7 cultural mountains introduced by Bill Bright and Loren Cunningham many years ago. And then in 2014, we saw the National Faith at Work Association that followed up our work in the International Coalition of Workplace Ministries. And so we saw in 2010 a more of a focus on church-based ministries and groups like Made to Flourish, which was a organization focused on pastors and helping pastors understand how to equip their men and women in their local congregations. So, International Coalition of Workplace Ministries was founded in 1997. There were about 1,200 organizations involved internationally. We had annual summits to promote the movement. We had an international directory and had products and services catalog online. And so that lasted until 2006. And then in 2014, the National Faith and Work Association was birthed to kind of take on, continue on what we had been doing there. And then we saw a proliferation of books being written on the subject. Between 1930 and 2000, there were about 350 titles published about faith and work, but by 2005, over 2,000 titles were documented by Pete Hammond, one of the leaders in our movement as well. And so that's also an indication where God is moving when you see people writing about the topic. In 2004, we saw a proliferation of articles in magazines and Fortune magazine and New York Times. And I was contacted in 2004, and primarily because George Bush had become president, and they credited the evangelical vote as the key reason he got elected. But there was more going on. There were many marketplace people beginning to share their faith publicly in their working lives. And so the New York Times called me one day and said, we want to do a story on faith in the workplace. And so they looked for somebody to build a story around. They asked me if I knew someone, which I did, and I gave them a banker in the Midwest who could build their story around. And so they did, and they called me 3 different times asking specifics. And one time they asked me, what's the difference between a Christian in the workplace and a non-Christian? And I gave them 4 ideas on that. And so it came out. It was an insert in the Sunday paper in 2004, and they actually did a pretty good job with it. So in 2004, Billy Graham gave us a quote that said, I believe that one of the next great moves of God is going to be through the believers in the workplace. That led to a meeting with, actually, before that quote happened, I had been contacted by the Billy Graham organization and asked to come and speak to me up at the Cove in Asheville, North Carolina. They said, we see that there's a move of God in the workplace. Can you help us understand it and how we can help fan that movement? And I thought, wow, that's great. And so I met with them. I brought other leaders to have a roundtable discussion that would end up leading to 3 different conferences that we participated with the Billy Graham organization and some other ministries. In 2005, CNBC did a feature story on their cable news program, and they featured myself and also Loren Cunningham about faith in the workplace. They talked about businesses expressing their faith in the workplace in that program. One of the things we discovered along the way was language and how we had to be careful with certain types of language. Most of us use the word marketplace in describing faith at work. But one of the things we discovered was that was not a broad enough term, that most people identified marketplace with executive business people. But the movement was much larger than that. Workplace seemed to be a better word to describe the overall faith at work movement. See, a teacher doesn't consider herself in the marketplace. A nurse doesn't consider herself in the marketplace. They do consider themselves in the workplace. And so we had to adjust our language. And that's why churches and pastors we encourage them to use the word workplace instead of marketplace to have a broader representation. And then between 1995 and 2002, there was a movement in corporate America. And this was when the birthing of employee affinity groups came about. And so, groups like the American Airlines Christian Group, Resource Group, and Ford Employees for Christ, and AT&T, all of these groups were birthed during this time. I was involved in the birthing, the first meeting of the Coca-Cola Christian Fellowship. They had over 250 show up for the very first meeting. And so this, too, was evidence that God moving in the workplace. Made to Flourish became a ministry in 2010, and their exclusive focus was to serve pastors in the workplace, helping pastors better understand how to equip men and women in the workplace to see their work as a calling and a ministry. And then Institute for Faith, Work, and Economics was birthed in 2011. And then we realized that we really still had a long way to go in touching the masses. So how many are we reaching through the modern day Faith at Work movement? Well, sadly, I would have to say probably less than 1% of our ministries are reaching the broader workplace marketplace. And so we have to reach more people. And the way we do this is through the local church and other initiatives. In 2019, we hosted the International Culture Shapers Summit in Washington, D.C. And this was a focus around the 7 cultural mountains of arts and entertainment, business, church, education, family, media, and government. And Bill Bright and Lauren Cunningham introduced this years ago, and their belief was that these 7 areas are the most important areas, and so we need to reach the leadership in those people operating at the top of these cultural spheres. Well, we haven't done such a great job in that so far, and we've had different initiatives, but we haven't penetrated the market as a whole that resulted in changing culture. Now, there is one group that actually has done that very effectively, and that's the Gay Rights Movement. They have effectively changed our nation around that topic from being a moral issue to being a civil issue. And they did it by using strategies in each of these 7 cultural spheres. So, the vision is to foster a spiritual awakening in our nation by catalyzing workplace leaders, to mobilize followers of Jesus in the workplace to a lifestyle of working, praying, caring, sharing, and discipling, and to live a lifestyle to become more like Jesus. Let's take a look at some of the trends that we're seeing. A significant unity among groups in the last 5-10 years has been taking place, and that's good news. Jesus told us in John 17 that we should walk together and that we should unify. More prayer in the workplace is taking place. There are more intercessors and prayer groups in the workplace. There are more technology innovations than any time we can remember. Online resources and training and websites and podcasts devoted to faith at work. And there's more training birth, the books and equipping tools and conferences and workshops. Then there's 300 plus city movements. There's an annual event called Movement Day in New York City talking about how to impact cities through revival and through transformation. There are more pastor networks and seminaries that are embracing faith at work, groups like Made to Flourish. The local church engagement has improved, but it's still slow. And we're seeing culturally more persecution and less free speech, and it's being attacked, and there's more government overreach than ever before. So, what's the major problem? Well, Faith at Work needs a larger delivery channel, but it already exists, and that's the local church. You see, there's over 350 churches where leaders gather weekly, but because of a lack of collaboration, funding, and reach into those local churches and helping pastors, it hasn't resulted in the kind of fruit we had hoped. We also need more effective 7M or 7 Mountain strategies. So, what's the key? Collaboration between workplace ministries, denominations, churches, parachurch groups, seminaries, colleges, and marketplace leaders. All of this is necessary for us to have a greater impact on the culture. So, in closing, I just want to encourage you to live your life in and through your work life. Live for Christ. And one of the tools we can provide to you is free, called Today God is First. It's a daily devotional that is read in 105 countries, and I started writing this in 1998. There are 3 different versions of it you can access for free at todaygodisfirst.com, and I hope you'll take advantage of that. God bless and have a great week, and may you experience Christ every day in your workplace. Take care.